Hello there, and welcome to Mysteries of Earth, the Forgotten Possibility. What if the history we know is only a fragment? What if buried beneath the weight of time, beyond the reach of memory, lies the story of an entire civilization that once thrived on this very Earth? 100,000 years ago? It sounds like the opening to a myth, a whisper from the imagination. And yet, when we pause to consider it, the question is not only thrilling, it is unsettling. Because it forces us to re-examine one of the most fundamental assumptions about humanity, that we are the first to build, to shape, to master. But what if we are not? We often think of civilization as a steady climb. Stone tools to bronze, bronze to iron, villages to cities, cities to empires, empires to modern nations. We picture a clear ladder of progress, rung by rung, with us standing proudly at the top. But is history truly that linear? Or could it be far more fragile, cyclical, and elusive than we dare to admit? After all, when we look at the span of time, our story is astonishingly brief. Our oldest surviving written records go back just 5,000 years. The pyramids of Egypt, often held up as symbols of ancient permanence, are barely 4,500 years old. And yet, anatomically modern humans, people who looked and thought like us, have existed for at least 200,000 years. That means for more than 95% of our species' existence, there are no written words, no records, no maps to guide us. What happened in those vast, undocumented ages? Were humans truly huddled in small bands, simple hunters and gatherers, for tens of thousands of years, before suddenly blossoming into civilization? Or is it possible that in the deep shadows of time, entire societies rose, flourished, and fell, leaving almost nothing behind? This is the forgotten possibility. Imagine standing on a windswept plain 100,000 years ago. The world feels both familiar and alien. Woolly mammoths wander across icy fields, saber-toothed cats prowl the forests, and rivers carve valleys untouched by cities or roads. And yet, somewhere in this ancient landscape, could there have been villages, roads, even something as strange and advanced as machines or monuments? If such a society had existed, where is the evidence? The simple answer is time. 100 millennia is long enough for nature to erase almost everything. Stone crumbles, metal corrodes, wood rots. Even mighty cities, if left untended, can vanish in just a few centuries. Look at Chernobyl, abandoned less than 40 years ago, and already being reclaimed by trees, moss, and animals. Now extend that process, not for decades, not for centuries, but for 100,000 years. Would anything remain recognizable? We might laugh at the thought. Surely something so significant couldn't just disappear. But history is filled with cautionary examples. The city of Troy was once considered a legend, a tale from Homer's imagination, until ruins were uncovered in the 19th century. The Mayan city of Tikal was swallowed by jungle for centuries, forgotten even by nearby populations. And yet those places are relatively recent. What about something far older? Something beyond the reach of memory, buried in layers of time we rarely bother to search. Even the land itself does not sit still. Continents drift, mountains rise, rivers shift course. Coastlines that were dry land 100,000 years ago are now deep beneath the ocean. If an advanced society thrived along those coasts, and many civilizations, including ours, favor the sea for trade and survival, Its ruins would now lie underwater, buried beneath silt, unreachable by casual exploration. The unsettling truth is that absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found something doesn't mean it never existed. It may only mean we haven't looked in the right place, or that time has done its work too well. But why does this idea disturb us? Why does it feel so radical to suggest that humanity may not be the first to climb the ladder of civilization? Perhaps it's because we like to see ourselves as the culmination of history, as though everything before us was a slow prelude leading to now. We comfort ourselves with the idea that progress is inevitable, that intelligence builds steadily, never falters, never resets. But deep down, we know that is not entirely true. History has shown us how fragile civilizations can be. The Roman Empire once stretched across continents, its legions seemingly invincible, and yet it crumbled. The great Maya cities collapsed, their stone temples overtaken by vines. The Sumerians, the world's first known urban culture, vanished into dust and clay. If such things can happen in just a few centuries, what could happen in 100,000 years? It is not hard to imagine an ancient people rising to brilliance, only to be undone by forces beyond their control, or perhaps even by their own mistakes. What is harder is imagining what they left behind, and whether we would recognize it if we found it. Here's a thought experiment. Let's say our own modern civilization suddenly ended tomorrow. Imagine a catastrophe erasing most of humanity, whether war, plague, or natural disaster. How long would our creations last? Our skyscrapers, built of steel and glass, might stand for a few centuries before weather and earthquakes brought them down. Roads would crack, bridges collapse, satellites fall from orbit. Within 10,000 years, forests and deserts would have swallowed nearly everything. 100,000 years from now, what would remain? Perhaps a few scattered artifacts, some buried foundations, maybe traces of plastics or radioactive isotopes in the soil. But would anyone then living without context be able to piece together the scale of our world? If that is true of us, why should it not be true of others before us? And so the forgotten possibility lingers like a ghost at the edge of history. The idea that we may not be unique, that the ground beneath our feet could conceal the ruins of not one story of civilization, but several, each erased by the turning of time's wheel. If such a society existed, the question is not just how it vanished, but how we might find its traces. Are there hints in myths and legends, echoes in unexplained artifacts, whispers in the deep genetic code of humanity itself? Or are we doomed to wonder forever, staring at an empty canvas where once there may have been a masterpiece? This is where our journey begins. A journey not just through archaeology and science, but through imagination, possibility, and humility. Because to ask, what if Earth had an advanced society 100,000 years ago, is really to ask, how much of history do we truly know? And how much has been lost to silence? In the next chapter, we'll step deeper into that silence, exploring the forces of catastrophe that could erase a civilization so completely that it leaves almost no trace at all. From shifting climates to falling stars, we'll uncover just how fragile greatness can be when the Earth itself turns against it. Vanished in catastrophe. Imagine, for a moment, a thriving civilization 100,000 years ago. Cities carved into stone, or perhaps glistening structures, built from materials we no longer recognize. Communities stretching along rivers and coastlines, trading goods, sharing knowledge, and shaping the earth in ways we can scarcely imagine. Then, in a single moment of terror, everything begins to unravel. Not slowly, not over centuries, but suddenly. This is the shadow of catastrophe. When we look at the long history of Earth, we see a planet that has never been gentle. Time and again, nature has proven that it can be both creator and destroyer. Entire species have risen, flourished, and been wiped away by forces far beyond their control. Why should human societies, or perhaps pre-human societies, not have shared the same fate? Could an ancient civilization have been erased, not by the slow hand of time, but by the violent sweep of disaster? The wrath of the ice. One of the greatest forces shaping our planet has always been climate. A single shift in temperature, a drop of just a few degrees, can alter everything. And in the deep past, Earth was a stage for immense swings in climate. The ice ages were not gentle seasons of cold, but vast, grinding epochs. Glaciers spread across continents, swallowing landscapes under walls of ice. Grasslands and forests vanished, replaced by barren tundras. Animals migrated or died, their habitats shrinking under the advancing frost. Now imagine a civilization built in a warmer age, thriving near fertile valleys or coastal plains. A sudden plunge in global temperatures could devastate their food supply, drying rivers, withering crops, and forcing migrations into harsher lands. Their people, once stable and secure, would be scattered. Their monuments, their cities, their stories, buried beneath sheets of ice that would grind stone to dust. And when the ice retreated, thousands of years later, what would remain? Perhaps nothing at all. The drowning seas. If ice could destroy by freezing, water could destroy by drowning. At the end of every glacial period came the opposite catastrophe, the great floods. As ice sheets melted, seas surged higher. Coastlines disappeared, valleys filled with water. Today, scientists estimate that during the last major glacial melt, sea levels rose by over 120 meters. Entire regions that were once dry land, rich with rivers, forests, and possibly people, are now hidden beneath the waves. Consider this. Most modern civilizations build along coasts. Trade, food, and travel all flourish where land meets water. If an advanced society 100,000 years ago had done the same, their heartlands would now lie drowned beneath oceans. Their ruins would be sealed under layers of silt and coral, unreachable by all but the most determined exploration. And as millennia passed, any memory of those cities would vanish with the tides, leaving only myths of sunken worlds. Fire from the sky, yet some disasters are even more sudden, so swift and violent that survival itself becomes nearly impossible. Few forces are more terrifying than an asteroid strike. 66 million years ago, one such impact ended the age of dinosaurs. The asteroid that struck near Chicxulub in modern Mexico released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. The blast incinerated everything for hundreds of kilometers. Tsunamis spread across oceans. The atmosphere filled with dust, blocking the sun, plunging Earth into darkness for years. Ecosystems collapsed, and nearly 3/4 of all species perished. That was a giant impact. But what about something smaller? Even an asteroid just a few kilometers wide could devastate a region, destroying cities, forests, and rivers alike. A single strike could throw enough ash and debris into the sky to disrupt climate worldwide. Now picture an advanced society, its population centered in fertile regions, suddenly hit by such a disaster. Their cities flattened, their skies darkened, their crops withered under years of cold. Survivors would scatter into wilderness, stripped of the means to rebuild. Would their descendants, generations later, even remember the greatness of their ancestors? Or would it become nothing more than a fading myth of gods, fire, and destruction? The fury of the earth, but the sky is not the only enemy. The earth itself can betray us. Volcanoes are nature's vents, releasing pressure from the molten heart of the planet. Yet some eruptions are so powerful They don't just reshape a landscape, they reshape history. About 74,000 years ago, in what is now Indonesia, Mount Toba erupted in one of the largest volcanic events in human history. It is believed to have released more than 10,800 cubic kilometers of ash, spreading across Asia and Africa. The eruption caused a volcanic winter, plunging global temperatures, reducing sunlight, and disrupting ecosystems. Some scientists argue that the human population at the time may have dwindled to just a few thousand survivors. If an advanced society had existed in that era, anywhere near Toba, or even dependent on stable climate elsewhere, it could have been completely erased. Entire cities smothered by ash, crops destroyed, skies darkened for years, and the survivors, reduced to struggling for food and warmth, would have little time or ability to preserve their civilization. In such a world, the memory of greatness could vanish faster than the ash settled, collapse from within, and yet, not all catastrophes come from outside. Sometimes the seeds of collapse lie within the civilization itself. What if an ancient society mastered powerful tools, perhaps harnessing energy sources we can't even imagine? What if they grew dependent on delicate systems of agriculture, trade, and control? A sudden war, a collapse of resources, or unchecked environmental destruction could undo everything they had built. Imagine vast forests cut down, soils depleted, rivers poisoned. Imagine rival powers locked in destructive wars, unleashing technologies that left their land uninhabitable. Even without asteroids or volcanoes, such self-inflicted wounds could reduce a great civilization to scattered tribes in just a few generations. The knowledge of how to build, how to create, how to sustain, lost, replaced by the desperate fight to survive. History gives us small examples. The collapse of Easter Island's society, the fall of the Maya, the abandonment of once great Mesopotamian cities, now magnify those collapses 1,000-fold. Could an entire global civilization have undone itself 100,000 years ago? The slow vanishing. Of course, not every end is dramatic. Sometimes civilizations do not fall in fire or flood, but simply fade. Migration. Cultural blending. The slow abandonment of technology when it no longer serves. Over centuries, a people may lose not only their tools, but the stories of how those tools were made. Descendants adapt to new lands and new lives until the memory of their ancestors' greatness becomes faint, then forgotten. In such a case, a once advanced society might not be remembered as a civilization at all. Instead, fragments of their existence might echo in myths of gods, sky people, or ancestors with powers lost to time. The traces of their lives could be so ordinary, buried stones, faint artifacts, that future generations never realized what they once meant. The unsettling truth, when we step back, one thing becomes clear. Catastrophe is not rare. It is constant. Earth has always been a planet of upheaval, reshaped again and again by ice, fire, water, and stone. For a civilization to survive even a few thousand years is extraordinary. For one to endure 100,000 years without disaster erasing it would be nearly impossible. So if an advanced society did exist in that deep past, the question is not whether catastrophe could have destroyed it. The question is, which catastrophe did? The silence of 100,000 years may be less a mystery of absence and more a reminder of fragility, that even greatness can vanish in a single night, that the story of humanity, of Earth itself, is not a steady climb, but a dance on the edge of disaster. And if civilizations can vanish once, can they vanish again? In the next chapter, we'll explore that silence itself, the problem of time. Why a span of 100,000 years is enough not just to bury ruins, but to erase the very memory that they ever existed. Fire from the earth. The earth beneath our feet is not still. It never has been. Beneath the quiet soil, beneath the forests, the rivers, and the mountains, the planet is alive with fire. A hidden ocean of molten rock, shifting, grinding, pressuring upward. Sometimes it escapes gently, through small eruptions, flows of lava, or clouds of ash. But sometimes it does not escape gently at all. Sometimes the earth tears itself open in fury, releasing more power than all the weapons of humanity combined. These are not ordinary eruptions. They are supervolcanoes, monsters of fire and stone capable of rewriting the story of life itself. And when we ask what might have happened to an advanced society 100,000 years ago, we cannot ignore them. Because few forces on this planet are as capable of erasing a civilization, completely, utterly, without mercy, as fire from the earth. The sleeping giants, volcanoes, are often pictured as tall cones, mountains that belch smoke and flame. But a supervolcano is something else entirely. It doesn't need a peak. Sometimes it appears as nothing more than a vast depression, a caldera spanning dozens of miles across. To stand at the surface, you might not even realize you were on top of one of the deadliest engines of destruction Earth has ever known. Hidden chambers of magma, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, lie beneath. Pressure builds over centuries, over millennia, until at last the crust can take no more. Then, eruption. The force is unimaginable. Instead of rivers of lava, a supervolcano hurls entire mountains of ash into the sky. Instead of local devastation, it alters the entire planet. One of the most famous of these ancient cataclysms is known as the Toba eruption in Indonesia. It happened roughly 74,000 years ago, close enough to touch the span of human history, but far enough that its true story is cloaked in mystery too. Ba, the Great Firestorm. The eruption of Mount Toba is believed to have been one of the largest volcanic events of the last 2 million years. Scientists estimate that it ejected more than 2,800 cubic kilometers of material, ash, rock, and gas, into the atmosphere. To give perspective, this was thousands of times more powerful than the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, and even greater than the infamous Krakatoa blast of 1883. Imagine standing in Southeast Asia at the time. The sky darkens, the sun disappears, a storm of ash falls like poisoned snow, entire forests burn, rivers boil, the land, once alive, becomes a wasteland of blackened rock and choking smoke. But the true destruction doesn't end at the eruption site. Ash spread across continents. Traces of Toba's fury have been found as far away as India and Africa. It blanketed skies, reflecting sunlight back into space. For years, perhaps even decades, the world shivered in what scientists call a volcanic winter. Crops failed, ecosystems collapsed, animals starved, and humans, fragile and scattered across the earth, faced one of their greatest tests of survival. Some researchers believe the eruption pushed humanity to the very edge of extinction, reducing our global population to as few as a few thousand breeding individuals. A narrow escape. A reminder that even our species' continued existence is balanced on a razor's edge. Now imagine this. If we, with our small bands of hunter-gatherers, nearly vanished in Toba's wake, what chance would an advanced civilization, rooted in cities, dependent on agriculture and stability, have had? would they not have been even more vulnerable? Civilization versus catastrophe. Think about what civilization means. Stability, agriculture, trade, settled populations, systems that rely on predictable seasons, on sunlight, on rainfall. Now imagine those systems in the aftermath of Oba. The sun hidden by ash for months or years. Summers turned cold, winters turned brutal. Rainfall patterns warped beyond recognition. Crops withered, rivers froze, and famine spread like wildfire. Even the most advanced technology of the time would have struggled. Without global communication, without robust transport, without the ability to shield entire populations from failing harvests, collapse would have been swift. The cities might have burned, the fields might have emptied, and survivors, few and scattered, might have been forced back into the forests, the caves, the wilderness, carrying little more than fragments of memory. It would not take long, just a few generations, for all evidence of a great society to vanish, swallowed by ash, buried beneath forests regrown, or eroded by rain and wind. The thin line between survival and extinction. Human history, our very existence, is filled with close calls. Toba may not have destroyed us, but it showed how fragile we were, and still are. What separates survival from extinction? Sometimes, just geography. A group living far from the eruption zone might endure while others vanish. Sometimes, it's chance, finding the right refuge, stumbling upon enough food, adapting quickly enough. But for an advanced society, the very things that made them powerful might have made them weak. A reliance on settled land, a dependence on large populations, a belief that the world was stable. When catastrophe comes, flexibility is survival, and civilizations are rarely flexible. Other giants, waiting beneath us, and Toba is not the only monster Earth has forged. Across the globe lie other sleeping giants. Yellowstone in North America, Taupo in New Zealand, Era in Japan. Each has erupted in the past. Each carries the potential, however remote, to erupt again with apocalyptic force. Even today, scientists monitor them closely, because the eruption of a single supervolcano would not merely be a regional disaster. It would be global. It would affect every nation, every ecosystem, every human being alive. If that is true now, with billions of us armed with science, technology, and global networks, what hope would there have been 100,000 years ago? The fire's hidden legacy. Yet, catastrophe does not only destroy. Sometimes, it shapes what comes after. If Toba or another eruption 100,000 years ago destroyed an advanced society, its survivors would not have carried forward their cities, their monuments, or their inventions. But perhaps they carried fragments. Stories of fire from the sky, of gods who punished, of nights without sun. Myths of destruction may, in fact, be faint echoes of real events, retold across generations until their origins were forgotten. What if the great flood myths of later cultures, tales of wrath and rebirth, were not just stories, but memories of real survivors of cataclysms like Toba? What if the human imagination itself was forged in the shadow of survival, shaped by the need to explain the inexplicable? In that sense, the fire from the earth may not just have destroyed. It may have transformed humanity, forcing us to adapt, to imagine, and to endure. A fragile continuation. When we speak of supervolcanoes, we speak of power beyond comprehension. Power that can darken skies across the world. Power that can bring civilizations, real or imagined, to their knees. If an advanced society did exist 100,000 years ago, it may have faced its greatest trial, not from enemies or war, but from the planet itself, the fire beneath the earth. And perhaps it was lost, not because it was weak, but because even the strongest cannot stand forever against the fury of a living planet. The ashes of Toba still linger, in sediments, in ice cores, in the faint shadow of humanity's genetic bottleneck. They whisper of survival, of near death, of the razor-thin line between what is remembered and what is lost forever. So if the earth once bore witness to a civilization long before our own, perhaps it was fire that claimed it, and perhaps the only trace we carry now is our own survival. But what happens when time itself becomes the destroyer? When tens of thousands of years grind away at stone, scatter artifacts, and erase memory? In the next chapter, we'll descend into the silence of deep time, the problem of evidence, and why the past may be far emptier than we imagine. Collapse from within. When we imagine the fall of civilizations, we often picture natural disasters, asteroids, volcanoes, floods, forces beyond our control. But history, and perhaps prehistory, tells us another story. Sometimes the greatest threat to a society does not come from the skies or the earth below. It comes from within. A darker possibility lingers when we ask, what if there was an advanced civilization 100,000 years ago? Perhaps it was not destroyed by nature at all. Perhaps it was undone by itself, by war, by greed, by overreach. Perhaps it crumbled, not in fire from the earth, but in fire of its own making. The seeds of destruction, civilization is fragile. Beneath its layers of stone and steel lies something delicate: trust, cooperation, balance. When those falter, the structures that seem eternal can collapse with shocking speed. We know this from the ruins scattered across our world. The Maya, whose cities rose like emerald jewels in the forests of Central America, only to be abandoned. The Roman Empire, mighty and sprawling, brought down not by a single invader, but by slow corrosion from within. Now, extend that pattern back further. Imagine a society far older, more ancient than any we know. They too might have discovered resources to harness, tools to expand their reach, ways to bend the earth to their will. But with those discoveries come choices, and sometimes those choices are fatal. The hunger for power. Where there are people, there is power. Where there is power, there is conflict. Imagine two ancient city-states, hidden 100,000 years ago. Both rich, both ambitious. One controls fertile valleys, another controls rivers of precious minerals. Trade connects them, until greed divides them. A single spark, a betrayal, and war begins. War, in any era, is a hungry thing. It consumes lives, resources, knowledge. An advanced society may have for it weapons beyond our imagination, tools of fire, stone, or even energies long forgotten. But no matter the technology, war leaves the same scars: famine, ruin, broken trust. Perhaps they fought so fiercely that their own achievements destroyed them. Perhaps the survivors of such wars were left scattered, stripped of knowledge, forced back into simpler ways of life. The monuments fell, the tools rusted, and time did the rest. The trap of exploitation. But war is not the only path to collapse. Another lies in how civilizations treat their environment. Even in our own time, we see it. Forests cut down, rivers drained, soils exhausted. Cities grow, but the land that feeds them withers. Imagine an ancient people with knowledge of agriculture, irrigation, or mining, tens of thousands of years ago. Perhaps they reshaped landscapes, diverted rivers, cleared vast forests. At first, it brought prosperity. Populations grew, cities flourished. But slowly, the earth pushed back. Crops failed. Water vanished. The balance tipped. Civilization relies on surplus, on more food than is immediately needed, on more resources than today requires. When the surplus disappears, collapse is never far behind. If such a society existed, its greatest strength, its mastery over nature, may also have been its greatest weakness. For nature can be bent only so far before it breaks. The spiral of decline. Collapse is rarely sudden. More often, it is a spiral. A series of small failures, each manageable on its own, but devastating together. A drought strikes. Harvests shrink. Trade falters. Hungry people riot. Leaders grow desperate, clinging to power. Wars erupt over what little remains. Knowledge is hoarded, then lost. Temples fall silent. Monuments stand abandoned. From the outside, it might look as if a civilization vanished overnight. But within, it was death by 1,000 cuts, each self-inflicted. Could this have happened 100,000 years ago? Could a society have grown, flourished, and fallen in silence, leaving no trace but whispers in myth and memory? Lessons from the known past. We don't need to look only at the distant unknown. History offers clues. The Maya built a stunning civilization, cities with pyramids, astronomy, art. But they cut too deeply into the forests, exhausted soils, and strained water supplies. Internal wars finished what the environment began. The Rapa Nui of Easter Island built colossal statues, monuments of stone. But as forests vanished, so too did their way of life. A society once thriving was reduced to survival on the edge. The Roman Empire collapsed not in a single moment, but under the weight of corruption, inequality, overextension, and environmental strain. If this is what happened in the last few thousand years, how many times might it have happened before? The silence of forgotten wars. There is another chilling thought. Perhaps traces of such ancient collapses are all around us, but we fail to see them. Stone can be repurposed. Metals can rust away. Stories can be twisted into legend. Imagine a war so vast, so consuming, that it wiped out not just a society, but the memory of it. Survivors, stripped of tools and trust, would return to simpler lives, hunter-gatherers, wandering tribes, carriers of vague memories. To their descendants, the ruins of their ancestors would be nothing more than strange rocks, curious shapes. The meaning would be lost. The story would begin again. The psychology of collapse. What makes collapse so haunting is that it is often a choice, or rather, a chain of choices. People take more than the land can give. Leaders wage wars they cannot sustain. Knowledge is kept secret instead of shared. The warning signs are ignored until it is too late. When we imagine an ancient advanced society 100,000 years ago, perhaps we should not only wonder how they lived, but how they failed. Did they know what was coming? Did they see their world unraveling? Or did they believe, as many do today, that the structures around them were unshakable, eternal? Civilizations fall not because collapse is inevitable, but because people convince themselves it is impossible. The final fade. And so, the darker possibility lingers, that if such a society once existed, it was not destroyed by flood, fire, or stone, but by itself. War that consumed its people, exploitation that hollowed its land, choices that chained its future to ruin. When the last city burned, when the last fields turned to dust, when the last survivors fled into forests and caves, the memory of greatness slipped into silence. What remained were myths of gods, giants, and golden ages. What remained were fragments too faint to prove, too heavy to forget. And time, always patient, erased the rest. Transition to the next mystery. If civilizations can fall by their own hands, then survival becomes a matter not only of strength, but of memory. But here lies another problem. Even if a society endures catastrophe, war, or collapse, can its story truly survive the weight of deep time? In the next chapter, we journey into the problem of memory itself, how evidence fades, how history vanishes, and why the silence of the past may not mean it was empty. The silent fade. When we imagine the fall of civilizations, we often picture cataclysm. Fire raining from the sky, mountains exploding, floods swallowing cities whole. It is a vision of endings that are violent, sudden, and unforgettable. But what if the end of an advanced society was quieter? Not destruction in an instant, but erosion over generations. Not a world consumed in fire, but one slowly dimmed until the light of memory itself flickered out. This is the story of collapse without catastrophe. The silent fade, the quiet unraveling. Civilizations do not always end with a scream. Sometimes they end with a whisper. Imagine a society 100,000 years ago, one that had discovered tools, agriculture, perhaps even forms of architecture or art, far beyond what we assume possible at that time. It may have thrived for centuries, perhaps millennia. Its people may have believed, like we do, that their progress was permanent, their culture eternal. But eternity is fragile. Progress is not a straight line, and survival is rarely guaranteed. Perhaps their decline began so subtly that no one noticed at first. A harvest a little smaller, a generation born into harder times, roads less traveled, tools used but no longer replaced. The signs would have been small, ordinary, but each one chipped away at the foundations, migration and dispersal. History shows us that when resources grow scarce, people move. Migration is one of humanity's oldest survival strategies. Imagine groups from this once thriving society leaving their cities, villages, or centers of knowledge. At first, it might have been temporary. A family searching for food, a clan exploring a new hunting ground. But slowly, more followed. The heartland that once pulsed with activity grew quieter. The roads became emptier. The walls of their homes crumbled without repair. Generations later, the descendants of these people might not even know where they came from. They would live in new lands, mixing with other groups, adapting to new ways of life. The old identity, once so strong, would fade into memory, then into silence. It would not feel like collapse to them. It would feel like change. But to history, it would be disappearance, blending and forgetting. Civilizations do not always fall apart into nothing. Sometimes they dissolve into others. Imagine this ancient society encountering other human groups, perhaps smaller, more mobile, less advanced by certain measures. Over generations, intermarriage and cultural exchange would blur the lines between them. But blending comes at a cost. Languages change, traditions shift. Specialized knowledge that once required entire communities to preserve, complex farming techniques, architecture, or metallurgy, can vanish if no one continues to practice them. Within a few centuries, the unique fingerprint of that civilization could be erased, its achievements absorbed into a larger whole. Its people would live on, but their story would not. The abandonment of knowledge. One of the most haunting aspects of the silent fade is the possibility that technologies or ideas were not lost suddenly, but simply abandoned. Why? Because survival demands simplicity. If a community shrinks, if trade routes break down, if populations scatter, the most complex skills become luxuries they can no longer afford. A tool that once seemed essential might become useless without the infrastructure to support it. Think of a machine today. Without replacement parts, without electricity, without networks of production and exchange, it becomes nothing more than a pile of metal. The knowledge to use it fades quickly if it is no longer needed. Now imagine the same thing happening tens of thousands of years ago. Farming techniques, methods of construction, systems of wabayusa, a writing or record keeping, all could vanish in just a few generations if survival required a return to simplicity. Knowledge is powerful, but it is also fragile. Without continuity, it evaporates. How history vanishes, we tend to think that history is permanent, that if something happened, the evidence will always be there, waiting to be found. But history can disappear quietly, not because it never existed, but because time erases its traces. Wood rots, cloth disintegrates, metals corrode. Even stone, given enough time, crumbles into dust. Without constant repair and renewal, even the greatest monuments fall to ruin. Forests reclaim them. Rivers carve them away. Ice grinds them to nothing. Within a few thousand years, nature erases the works of humanity so thoroughly that they may never have existed at all. Multiply that by 100,000 years, and even the strongest structures would be indistinguishable from the rocks and soils around them. And so, the memory of a civilization does not need fire or flood to vanish. It can vanish simply by being forgotten, its stories unspoken, its ruins erased, its legacy buried beneath time itself. The echoes we might already carry. Here lies another mystery. Even if the civilization faded, perhaps its people did not. They may be our ancestors. Their DNA may still flow through our veins. Their myths may still echo faintly in the oldest legends, whispered around firelight. When ancient cultures spoke of golden ages long past, of gods who once walked the earth, of great builders and forgotten empires, were they inventing stories? Or were they remembering, faintly, the lives of those who came before them, blurred and twisted across generations? The silent fade leaves no monuments, but perhaps it leaves whispers. And whispers are harder to trace than ruins, a civilization lost without a fall. The silent fade is the most haunting possibility because it is the most plausible. It requires no asteroid, no supervolcano, no extraordinary catastrophe. Only time. A society could decline slowly, blend into others, abandon its complexity, and leave behind only fragments. To the survivors, it would not feel like an apocalypse. It would feel like life going on. But when we look back from thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of years later, all we would see is emptiness. No ruins, no clear record, only silence. And that silence might trick us into believing nothing was ever there. A question for ourselves: when we reflect on this possibility, we are left with an unsettling question. How much of our own world could vanish in the same way? If our technologies, our cities, our records were left untended, how long would they survive? 1,000 years? 10,000? 100,000? Would anything recognizable remain? Or would our story too fade into silence, leaving only myths for the next people to rediscover? The silent fade is not just a possibility for the past, it is a warning for the present. Transition to the next chapter. But even if civilizations fade quietly, another question remains. What if their legacy did not vanish entirely? What if fragments of their existence linger, not in ruins, not in memory, but in something far deeper, written into the very code of life itself? In the next chapter, we explore how genetics might carry the last echoes of forgotten societies, traces of a world erased, but still alive within us. The time gap problem. When we talk about civilizations, we usually measure them in centuries. Rome lasted for a little over 1,000 years. Ancient Egypt endured, in one form or another, for more than 3,000. Even that span feels like an eternity to us. But what about 100,000 years? That stretch of time is so vast that it almost defies imagination. Empires rise and fall in the blink of an eye compared to it. Cities vanish, cultures dissolve, and memories crumble long before the clock has ticked even a fraction of that distance. And this is the true barrier between us and any hypothetical advanced society that might have lived 100,000 years ago. The problem is not whether they could have existed. The problem is whether anything of them could survive long enough for us to find. This is the time gap problem. The fragility of memory. Before we even speak of stone and steel, we must first speak of memory itself. Human memory is astonishingly fragile. We like to think of stories as lasting forever, but even the strongest oral traditions fray over time. A tale passed faithfully for a dozen generations may survive in spirit, but its details shift like shadows. Heroes become gods. Events become myths. Dates blur. Without writing, memory evaporates. Consider this. Even the most powerful stories we have today, myths of creation, epic poems, ancestral legends, rarely stretch back more than a few thousand years. Beyond that, history becomes fog, and memory collapses into silence. If an advanced society existed 100,000 years ago, its stories would be gone, its myths forgotten, its name erased from every tongue. The chain of memory would have snapped long before we ever came close to our own age. So we cannot rely on memory. We must look for material. But material, too, is fragile. The erosion of evidence. Imagine a city built of stone, wood, or even tales. Now, let us abandon it. No one tends its walls. No one repairs its roads. No one shields its monuments from the weather. What happens? Within decades, vines creep across the walls. Roofs collapse. Roads crack under frost and rain. Within centuries, the city becomes a ruin. Within millennia, the ruin is reduced to rubble. And given tens of thousands of years, even that rubble is gone, ground to dust by wind and water. Erosion is relentless. Rain dissolves mortar. Rivers cut valleys where cities once stood. Forests reclaim foundations. Deserts swallow monuments. Ice scrapes the surface of the land like a blade. Every force of nature conspires against permanence. And in 100,000 years, nature always wins. The grinding earth, but erosion is not the only eraser. The earth itself is restless. Tectonic plates shift. Mountains rise. Continents drift. The ocean floor swallows land and gives birth to new islands. Volcanoes bury landscapes in fire and ash. Earthquakes shatter valleys, drowning entire regions in seconds. A city standing on the surface 100,000 years ago might now lie at the bottom of the sea, or it might have been crushed into the crust of the earth, recycled into new rock, its stones ground and melted until no trace remained. Even mountains, the tallest symbols of permanence, are temporary. Over millions of years, they rise and fall like waves. And if mountains vanish, what chance does a fragile monument or settlement have? We are looking for ghosts on a planet that constantly rewrites its own skin. The tyranny of climate. And then, there is the climate. In the span of 100,000 years, the Earth can change drastically. Ice ages sweep across continents, burying everything beneath sheets of ice, thousands of feet thick. Deserts expand, sandblasting anything left upon their surface. Jungles grow and rot, devouring ruins under layers of vegetation. Seas rise and fall, swallowing coastlines where people once lived. Consider how much of human civilization today clings to coastlines. If an ancient society too lived by the sea, its cities would now be drowned. The ruins would lie beneath layers of silt, invisible beneath shifting tides. Climate is a sculptor that leaves almost nothing untouched, and across 100,000 years, its hand erases nearly all. Why we should not be surprised. This is the heart of the time gap problem. It is not that such a civilization could not have existed, but that if it did, the odds of us finding it now are vanishingly small. We should not expect clear evidence. We should not expect monuments or books or tools lying in the open, waiting to be discovered. What survives across such time must be rare, astonishingly rare. And yet, even knowing this, we wonder, could there be something left? A fragment buried deep in rock. A tool sealed in ice. A symbol carved into stone and hidden in a cave that escaped collapse. Is it possible that we have already found fragments, but dismissed them, assuming they belonged to us, not to someone before? The time gap does not erase possibility. It only buries it beneath silence. The mirage of permanence. When we walk through our own cities, glass towers, steel bridges, endless concrete roads, it feels impossible to imagine them vanishing. And yet, even they are fragile. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, what would remain? Within a few decades, plants would crack the roads. Skyscrapers would corrode and collapse. Ridges would fall. Within a few thousand years, almost nothing would stand. Within 100,000 years, even our strongest monuments would be gone, erased, buried, or recycled by the earth. Think of that the next time you look at the skyline of a city. Think of how quickly permanence becomes illusion. If our world would vanish so completely, why should we be surprised that no trace remains of a civilization that may, or may not, have existed so long ago? The deepest mystery. The time gap problem teaches us humility. It reminds us that history is fragile, memory is fleeting, and evidence is temporary. It warns us that entire worlds could vanish without a trace, not because they never existed, but because time is a ruthless editor. Perhaps advanced humans lived 100,000 years ago. Perhaps they thrived, built, dreamed, and struggled, just as we do now. And perhaps they are gone not because of catastrophe, but because time itself erased them. One grain of sand, one drop of water, one shifting plate at a time. If that is true, then we are left with a haunting question. How much of the human story has already been lost forever? Transition to the next chapter. But even if most traces vanish, there are exceptions, clues that endure against all odds. Not grand monuments or sprawling cities, but smaller things, tools hidden in caves, bones fossilized in stone, carvings left on rock faces that time has spared. In the next chapter, we search for those fragile remnants, the potential fingerprints of forgotten worlds that may still lie hidden in plain sight. Resetting humanity. What would it take to reset humanity? Not to wipe us out completely, but to push us back to the edge, to strip away our knowledge, unravel our cities, and scatter us into survival mode. It doesn't take much. One catastrophic event, an asteroid, a supervolcano, a sudden shift in climate, could be enough to collapse everything we've built. And in just a few generations, all memory of what once was could be lost. This is not only possible, it has happened before. Again and again, Earth has pressed the reset button. Species thrive, then vanish. Worlds rise, then crumble. So what if, 100,000 years ago, humanity itself was reset? The fragile thread of civilization, we often imagine civilization as unshakable, as though technology and culture are permanent fixtures. But in truth, they rest on the thinnest of threads. Think about it. How many people alive today could rebuild electricity from scratch? How many could smelt metal, weave cloth without machines, or grow food without modern tools? Our knowledge is powerful, but it is also specialized. It is distributed across billions of people, not contained within any single mind. And if the chain of connection is broken, the knowledge evaporates. If disaster struck, how long would smartphones, satellites, and skyscrapers last without repair? How many generations would it take before they became myths? This is the terrifying fragility of human progress. It does not vanish in centuries. It can vanish in decades. A world reduced to survival. Picture a thriving society, its people building cities, mastering tools, charting the stars. Now imagine catastrophe. Perhaps it comes as fire from the sky, or ash from below. Perhaps it comes slowly, through famine, disease, or climate. At first, people cling to the old ways. They try to preserve what they know. But as resources dwindle and infrastructure collapses, survival takes priority. Food becomes more important than mathematics, shelter more urgent than science. The library burns while the people flee. Within a few generations, the survivors are no longer engineers or scholars. They are hunters, foragers, and wanderers. They pass down fragments of memory, stories of a golden age, of gods who wielded fire and metal, of cities that touched the sky. But they no longer remember how to build them. The world has been reset. The disappearance of knowledge. Knowledge is not only fragile, it is mortal. Without written records, most of it dies in a single lifetime. Oral traditions preserve wisdom, but they distort and shrink with every retelling. What begins as history becomes legend. What begins as truth becomes myth. Imagine if all books, all digital archives, all libraries vanished tomorrow. How long would it take before advanced knowledge was irretrievable? Perhaps a generation, 2 at most. Children born after the collapse would not know what computers were. Grandchildren would barely recognize the ruins of a city. By the time of the great-grandchildren, those ruins would already be part of the landscape, a mountain of stone and metal, a place for stories, not science. Knowledge dies faster than stone crumbles, nature the conqueror. And as knowledge fades, nature takes its throne again. Forests creep into abandoned streets. Roots tear apart concrete. Rivers cut through suburbs. Birds nest in empty towers. Sand drifts across highways. The wild does not hesitate. It claims what is left behind. And given enough time, it does more than claim. It erases. In a few centuries, the ruins of cities would be overgrown. In a few millennia, they would be buried. In tens of thousands of years, even the memory of them would vanish, crushed into the earth's crust, or drowned beneath the seas. When nature reclaims the world, it does so completely. And so, if there was an advanced society 100,000 years ago, it may not have fallen in fire and chaos. It may have simply faded, reset by catastrophe, erased by time. The myths of lost worlds. Could this be why so many ancient myths speak of golden ages and lost worlds? Legends of Atlantis, stories of gods walking among humans, tales of fire from the sky and floods that covered the earth. Are these not echoes of reset societies? Perhaps our ancestors were not only inventing stories, but trying to remember fragments of something real. A civilization that lived, fell, and was forgotten. In this way, myths may be the last surviving artifacts of resets, not tools, not buildings, but whispers, distorted and incomplete, carried forward through generations until they no longer resemble history at all. If so, then our myths are not just stories, they are warnings. The cycle of forgetting, resetting is not only possible, it may be part of the human story. History itself shows us the pattern. Empires rise, and when they fall, much of their knowledge falls with them. The collapse of Rome plunged Europe into centuries of darkness. The burning of libraries, Alexandria, Baghdad, countless others, destroyed treasures of wisdom we will never recover. And those collapses happened within a few thousand years. Imagine extending that silence to 100,000. The cycle of forgetting is brutal. It spares almost nothing. The legacy of a reset. So what remains after humanity is reset? Tools, perhaps, buried in caves, forgotten in riverbeds. Symbols carved in stone. Stories passed from parent to child, until they twist into something unrecognizable. And perhaps something else remains. Instincts. The fear of the dark, the awe of fire, the drive to cooperate, to tell stories, to dream. These may be the true survivors of resets, not the monuments of stone or metal, but the patterns written into our very psychology. We carry those patterns still. They are echoes of every reset humanity has endured, whether 100,000 years ago or within the fragile arc of our recorded past. A sobering question. If one catastrophe could reset humanity 100,000 years ago, could it happen again? Could all we have built, our skyscrapers, satellites, and cities, vanish within the span of a few generations? Could our descendants one day wander through forests where our capitals once stood, telling myths of people who flew through the sky and captured the light of stars? It is a sobering question, because the answer is yes. It has always been yes. The thread of civilization is strong when woven together, but it frays easily when cut. And history shows us that resets are not only possible, they are inevitable. Transition to the next chapter. But if resets are part of our story, what does that say about us? Perhaps the real mystery is not that civilizations vanish, but that humanity endures. We adapt, survive, and rebuild, no matter how many times the slate is wiped clean. In the next chapter, we explore the resilience of our species and why, even after resets, humanity continues to rise again. Traces in our blood. What if the last fragments of a forgotten civilization are not hidden in ruins, not buried beneath mountains, not drowned beneath seas, but inside us. Not in stone, not in steel, but in blood. Could the descendants of an advanced society from 100,000 years ago still walk among us today, their legacy written into the very code of our DNA? The body as a time capsule. Unlike cities, unlike machines, unlike stories carved in stone, DNA endures. It is copied and carried forward every time life creates life. Passed silently from parent to child, stretching across millennia, DNA is a time capsule, one written not in ink, but in the very fabric of existence. We like to think of history as something external, preserved in artifacts. But what if history is also internal? What if we are carrying fragments of forgotten people inside our very cells? This isn't speculation without precedent. We already know that our blood holds echoes of lost populations. Neanderthals, Denisovans, people who once walked beside us, loved, struggled, and vanished, but never truly disappeared. Their bodies are gone. Their cities, if they built them, are gone. But parts of them are still alive, within us. So if another society lived 100,000 years ago, advanced and thriving, could their genetic whispers still flow through our veins? The proof of precedent. Not long ago, the idea that we carried Neanderthal DNA would have sounded absurd. For centuries, Neanderthals were seen as brutish others, thought to have died out without leaving a trace. But modern genetics shattered that picture. Studies revealed that nearly all non-African people today carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. That means, if you are listening right now, there's a good chance a fragment of your body was once part of theirs. And it doesn't end there. Populations in Asia and Oceania also carry traces of Denisovans, another mysterious branch of humanity known from only a handful of fossils. These fragments in our blood are not just curiosities. They are proof that human history is far more tangled, interconnected, and mysterious than the simple story we once believed. If the shadows of Neanderthals and Denisovans still live within us, why not the shadows of others? Why not the remnants of a people advanced enough to vanish without a trace, leaving their final record only in our biology, the language of fragments? But here lies the paradox. DNA can whisper that someone existed. It can reveal that two populations met, mingled, and shared life. But it cannot tell us who they truly were. It cannot show us their cities. It cannot replay their songs. It cannot restore their beliefs, their stories, their languages. DNA is survival, not culture. It tells us that someone was here, but not what they dreamed of or how they lived. It is like finding a single letter torn from a book, proof that a story was written, but no clue to its plot. So even if fragments of an ancient advanced society survive within us, the tragedy is this: we may never know them beyond biology. Their art, their wisdom, their achievements may have perished with time, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their bloodline. The vanishing of identity. And there is another challenge. Time itself erases even DNA. When a small group mixes into a much larger population, their genetic fingerprint fades. Each generation dilutes it further, until their once distinct presence becomes scattered threads, indistinguishable from the vast tapestry of humanity. After 100,000 years, the signal could be almost gone, perhaps still there, buried in complexity, but so faint, so fragmented, that we cannot recognize it. And so, just as their monuments would crumble into dust, Their bloodline too might dissolve into anonymity. We could be carrying the last traces of a vanished civilization right now, and never even realize it. The ghosts in our genes. This is why some scientists describe DNA as containing ghost populations, groups that left no bones we have found, no artifacts we recognize, yet still left their signatures in us. The concept itself is haunting. Imagine an entire people, faces, names, cultures, worlds, vanished without a single visible trace, and yet their legacy lingers invisibly inside us. What if one of those ghost populations was not merely another branch of early humanity, but the survivors of a society erased by catastrophe? What if their genes are still alive, though their cities are gone? It is a chilling thought, that the only evidence of their existence is the quiet persistence of their bloodline, the mystery of our own origins. And here is the most unsettling part. We do not need an ancient advanced society to prove this mystery. Our own genetic history already shows us how much we do not know. Neanderthals were rediscovered not through ruins, but through DNA. Denisovans, an entire branch of humanity, were unknown until a single finger bone revealed their genetic identity. An entire population hidden inside us, waiting to be recognized. If that could happen once, why not again? Why not with a people we still have not named, still have not recognized? A people whose story may never be told in full? Our blood might already contain their secret. Culture versus code, but this is where biology reveals its limits. DNA does not remember art. It does not preserve architecture. It does not record the rise and fall of civilizations. If a forgotten society gave us their blood, all that survives is biology, not knowledge. And perhaps that is the cruelest fate of all, to live on, but only as fragments, to be remembered, but never known, to become not ancestors in memory, but only sequences in chromosomes. The humbling truth, if we imagine such a people, an advanced society, erased by time, whose only trace is hidden in us. What does it say about ourselves? It says that we too are vulnerable, that our skyscrapers, satellites, and stories may vanish, that one day the only legacy of our civilization may not be monuments or machines, but small fragments carried silently in the DNA of those who come after. We could one day become the same kind of ghost population, remembered only in blood, forgotten in every other way. The humbling truth is this: the body remembers what the earth forgets, but even that memory fades. Closing reflection. So could their DNA still be inside us? Perhaps. Could we recognize it for what it is? Perhaps not. The mystery of blood is that it tells us we are not alone, that we are composites built of many peoples. But it cannot tell us what worlds they built, or what dreams they lost. And maybe that is the greatest tragedy of all, that their survival within us is not a story, but a silence. Transition to the next chapter. But what if silence were broken? What if proof surfaced, not in blood, but in stone? An artifact, unmistakable and undeniable, capable of rewriting everything we thought we knew. In the next chapter, we explore what it would mean if we discovered undeniable evidence of a civilization that lived and vanished 100,000 years ago. A discovery that changes everything. What if tomorrow morning, the news broke, a team of archaeologists announces a discovery so undeniable, so irrefutable, that it rewrites human history in a single headline? Not a myth, not speculation, but proof. a fragment of machinery buried deep in rock, older than any city, a library etched into stone, describing a civilization 100,000 years ago, or a perfectly preserved structure uncovered beneath the ice, with technology far beyond what the ancient world was thought capable of. Imagine, for a moment, the shockwave. The collapse of certainty. For centuries, human history has been built on a simple narrative, that progress is linear, that civilization began only a few thousand years ago in Mesopotamia, and that before that, we were simply wandering tribes, slowly learning to farm, to write, to build. But one undeniable discovery would shatter that story. It would force us to accept that civilization is not a straight line. It is a cycle. That we are not the first, not the only, and perhaps not even the greatest. The pride of modern humanity, the belief that we stand at the pinnacle of history, would crumble overnight. Science under fire. The first tremor would be felt in science. Archaeology and anthropology would be thrown into chaos. Entire careers built on the idea of a 10,000-year-old timeline of civilization would collapse. Textbooks would be rewritten, university lectures overturned, and thousands of long-dismissed, fringe theories revisited with new urgency. How many discoveries once labeled impossible would suddenly demand a second look? How many artifacts locked away in museum basements would be re-examined, not as oddities, but as evidence? And most unsettling of all, how many warnings from myth, legend, and folklore would reveal themselves to be history disguised as story? The scientific community would not reject the discovery. It couldn't, but it would wrestle with it fiercely. Some would cling to old frameworks, others would leap into new theories, and for decades, perhaps centuries, the debate would rage. What were they like? How advanced were they? And why did they fall? Religion confronts the echo, but science would not be the only pillar shaken. Religion, too, would feel the tremor. For many faiths, humanity is unique, created, chosen, special. Civilization is often tied to divine order, to the unfolding of a sacred story. What happens when we learn we are not the first chosen, not the only children of destiny, but merely the latest? Some believers would reject the discovery outright, dismissing it as false, a trick, or a misinterpretation. Others would try to weave it into their doctrine, seeing the lost civilization as part of a divine cycle, a forgotten chapter of creation. But either way, the certainty would be gone. Humanity's sacred uniqueness would be called into question. And perhaps, in that uncertainty, new interpretations of faith would emerge, humbling us, broadening us, or dividing us further. The political storm. Now imagine the impact on politics. A discovery like this would not stay in the realm of science or religion. It would become a weapon. Nations would fight for ownership of the site. Governments would classify findings, restricting access in the name of national security. If advanced technology was found, something not yet replicated today, the race to control it would ignite a geopolitical firestorm. Superpowers would scramble to harness it, fearing what might happen if rivals gained the upper hand. But beyond technology, even the knowledge alone would be dangerous. Because knowledge is power. And whoever controls the story of humanity controls the way we see ourselves. The shattering of pride. But perhaps the greatest impact would not be on governments or churches or universities. It would be on us, on ordinary people. For centuries, we have walked with the quiet confidence that we are the apex, the first and only species to build great cities, to command the earth, to reach for the stars. What happens when we realize we are not the first, but only the latest? Our pride would crack. Our arrogance would be humbled, and for the first time, humanity would have to ask itself, if others came before us, if they were advanced, if they vanished, then what does that mean for our future? The mirror of mortality. This is where the discovery becomes more than history. It becomes a mirror. Because if they rose and fell, then so can we. The myth of eternal progress would die. Civilization would no longer seem inevitable, unbreakable, destined to endure forever. Instead, we would see ourselves for what we truly are: temporary, fragile, a layer upon a layer in the endless story of Earth. And maybe, just maybe, that realization would awaken something in us. Perhaps we would learn humility. Perhaps we would learn to preserve what we have. Or perhaps we would continue as before, blind to the warning written in someone else's ashes. The new human story. One discovery could change everything. Not just the past, but the future. Because history is not just a record, it is a compass. If we prove we are not the first civilization, then our story is no longer about rising from nothing. It is about inheriting a world that has risen and fallen before. And suddenly, all of human history becomes less about progress and more about cycles, less about triumph and more about survival. The old timeline would break apart. The idea of humanity as the inevitable end of the story would be gone. Instead, we would see ourselves as players in a much longer, much more mysterious play. A play where civilizations bloom and wither, again and again, across ages so vast we can barely imagine them. The collect. Eve question. But the most haunting impact of all would not be the debates, the politics, or even the rewriting of history. It would be the question whispered in every heart. If they were here before us, what happened to them? Did they destroy themselves? Did the earth erase them? Or did something else intervene? And if it happened to them, could it happen to us? Suddenly, our skyscrapers, satellites, and space stations would look less eternal and more fragile, like temporary sparks in an endless dark. Proof of a lost civilization would not just change how we see the past, it would change how we fear the future. Closing reflection. A single discovery could topple our most sacred assumptions. It could humble science, test religion, fracture politics, and shatter human pride. It would not just be a discovery of history, it would be a discovery of ourselves. A reminder that we are not alone in time, that others came before us, that others may come after, and that our place in the story is not permanent. Transition to the next chapter. But if we accept this possibility, if we allow ourselves to imagine it fully, then another question arises. Are we prepared to face the future with this knowledge? Or are we destined to repeat the same cycle of rise and ruin? In the next chapter, we step back from speculation and reflect on what this story means for us, today, tomorrow, and in the deep time yet to come. Echoes across time. What is the purpose of imagining a past we may never prove? Why spend time on questions that have no easy answers? Questions about civilizations erased, about forgotten ages, about people who may have walked the earth long before history remembers. The answer lies in the echoes. Because whether these echoes are real or imagined, they remind us of something vital, that our story is not the only one the earth could tell. That time is deep, far deeper than our imagination usually allows, and that permanence, The thing we assume belongs to us is an illusion, the power of imagination. History is written with stone, bone, and ink, but imagination fills the gaps between them. When we allow ourselves to wonder about a civilization that might have thrived 100,000 years ago, we step outside the narrow path of what we already know. We break free from the tidy timeline drawn in classrooms and museums. And in doing so, we see the Earth for what it truly is, a stage vast enough to hold countless stories, not just ours. Think of it. The continents themselves shift, mountains rise and collapse. Seas expand, drown coastlines, and then retreat. Entire ecosystems vanish without leaving a single fossil to tell their tale. If the Earth can erase forests, rivers, even whole species, why not a civilization? Imagination becomes more than fantasy. It becomes a form of humility, the humility of impermanence, because what this possibility whispers to us is uncomfortable. We are not permanent. Every skyscraper, every satellite, every digital archive we build, it all feels enduring. Yet, to the Earth, it is no different than the tools of flint knappers or the pottery of the first farmers. Dust waiting for the wind. We comfort ourselves with the idea of progress, with the notion that each generation builds upon the last. But deep time reminds us that progress is fragile, that memory is fragile, that even the most advanced knowledge can vanish in the space of a few centuries, if not preserved, if not passed on. Think of fire, the simplest technology. If it were lost, how many of us today would know how to bring it back? How many of us could strike stone against stone until a spark was born? Now imagine the loss, not of fire, but of electricity, of medicine, of satellites, of the countless layers of invisible knowledge that hold our world together. The echoes of a possible deep civilization are not just a mystery to entertain. They are a warning. They remind us that we may be temporary guests on this stage, just like those who may have come before. The missing chapters, and so we return to the greatest mystery of all, the missing chapters of Earth's story. Think of history as a book. We read a few late pages: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Rome, the modern world. But the book is thick, and most of its earlier chapters are blank to us, torn away by time, buried beneath rock and sea. Every so often, we stumble upon fragments: a fossilized bone, a tool, a shard of pottery. Each one is a word, a sentence, a glimpse. Yet we know these fragments are not the whole story. Could there be chapters describing civilizations now lost to us? Whole worlds of people with their own myths, their own technologies, their own triumphs and failures? If such chapters exist, then the history we know is only the prologue. The true story of humanity, and perhaps even of intelligence itself, remains hidden. And maybe that is the point, why it matters. Skeptics may ask, why care about something unproven? Why give thought to civilizations we have no evidence for? Because asking the question reshapes how we see ourselves. It humbles us, it warns us, and it inspires us to look harder, to search deeper, to never assume the story is complete. The danger of certainty is arrogance. The belief that we are the first and only blinds us to the lessons of fragility, of resilience, of humility. But by daring to imagine others before us, we learn to cherish what we have and to prepare for what might come. After all, if time can erase them, it can erase us. But if echoes remain, If some faint trace of their existence survived, then maybe we can ensure the same for ourselves. Reflections in the mirror. In the end, the echoes across time do something extraordinary. They force us to see ourselves not as rulers of history, but as participants in it. When you look at a city skyline at night, glowing with lights, remember this: a civilization 100,000 years ago, if it ever existed, might have had its own lights, its own towers, its own rhythms, and now they are gone. One day, so too will ours. The echoes remind us that we are not eternal, and yet, in that truth, there is beauty. Because knowing we are temporary means knowing that what we build, what we love, what we pass on, it all matters even more. Perhaps the echoes are not meant to give us answers. Perhaps they are meant to give us perspective. Closing reflection. Earth is old, older than our imagination, older than our arrogance. And within its vast memory are chapters still unread. Some may never be found. Others may reveal themselves when we least expect it. A stone unearthed, a fossil exposed, a ruin uncovered beneath the sea. But whether we find them or not, the echoes remind us of this: we are not the masters of time. We are its travelers, brief, fragile, and fleeting. The Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Digital Age, all are but sparks in the dark. Sparks that flare and vanish. Sparks that, if we are lucky, leave behind echoes. And perhaps that is the deepest mystery of all, that the earth remembers, even when we do not, that the missing chapters are still there, waiting, and that one day, long after we are gone, someone else may wonder about us. Subtle transition. This is where our story pauses, not ends, because the earth's mysteries are never finished. They wait, patient, in stone, in sea, in silence. And as long as we are here, we will keep listening for the echoes.